It's a hot spot for condo dwellers looking for a patch of grass for their dogs to do their business. It is a playground for urban families. It's also a popular place if you just want to grab a book and grab a seat on a bench. We're inside Victoria Square Memorial Park. It's a stone's throw from the Thompson Hotel, right at Portland and Wellington. Now, there's a few plaques around, though. What people don't realize, many people don't realize when they come to the park, is what they're actually standing on. This is the oldest cemetery in the city for British settlers. And the thing is, there's still hundreds of bodies right beneath our feet. Any idea how many people you think might be buried here?
That's funny that you should ask, because we asked ourselves that question and we weren't sure.
Would you be surprised to know that there's bodies still buried here?
Yeah, a little bit.
400 to 500.
Come on. No way. I thought maybe like 10 or 12. 400 to 500 is a bit much.
I guess it's always it's good to be close to your mortality. Keep that in mind, I guess.
Now, jokes aside, the area was part of the Fort York military site and was a burial ground for 70 years from 1790 to 1860. The first person buried here at this site was the infant daughter of Lieutenant Governor John Graves Simcoe, the founder of what we now know as the City of Toronto. And she's joined by hundreds of others whose remains still remain here in shallow graves in the center of the city.
There would be dozens of bodies up there from the War of 1812. Toronto was a hospital depot during the conflict, and during some months of the war, you would have had regular internment, regular burials there, as those who were brought to the hospital for treatment perished from their wounds.
How shallow are some of the graves here?
You're looking at only a few feet in some places, separating the contemporary surface level and the graves. And this is why people should be careful when it comes to letting their dogs off a leash. They don't want to be digging too deep, or else they may find something they don't intend to find.
As we mentioned, there are some plaques around. You're looking at the monument of the War of 1812 here in the center of the park. And there's also some tombstones here on the far end of the park. At times, they go unnoticed, though they tell an important part of the history of this site, as well as the challenges that families were facing way back when.
The state of this tombstone gives you an idea of the state of neglect in which the entire cemetery was at some point. So this is the tombstone of Elizabeth Francis, who died very young. She was 4 months old. And she was the daughter of a major in the regiment at Fort York. So this tells us a few things. First of all, it gives us an idea of the infant mortality at the time. She died in 1830. But we can also see that people at Fort York, especially if they were major and a little bit higher up, they live with their entire families there. So although this was a military burial ground, some civilians were also buried here, especially civilians that were family members of people positioned at Fort York.
A little bit more history that we learned today. The military lands here used to stretch from Fort York all the way to what we now know as Blue Jays Way, and it wasn't until the military started to sell off some land that the area slowly started to be developed. Now, there was no fences around the cemetery, so they actually had issues with cows grazing here at the cemetery. And you'll also notice the paths here that go around the park. If you look at it from above and got an aerial view of it, the paths actually make a rectangle, and inside the rectangle is where the cemetery was and where the remains of hundreds still lie today.